Nobody tells you to be afraid of your own blood, to keep an eye out for your own family. Unfortunately, for these 4 young boys, their demise was written in their own home. They were killed by the one person who was supposed to love them no matter what and keep them safe even if the world was ending. For these boys, their world was ended by their own mother. Welcome back to another episode of Twisted Minds. My name is James, and today we're going to be talking about a case that is so tragic that it shocked an entire nation. The case of Susan Eubanks is one that has captured the attention of many. How did a day that started with cheers for the Chargers end up with the ruthless murder of 4 innocent souls? It was October 26th, 1996, a day that would forever be remembered as one of the most tragically fateful days for one particular family in California, the Eubanks. It was a chilly day in San Marcos, California. The air was thick with the scent of alcohol as Susan Eubanks and her boyfriend, Rennie Dodson, continued to drink, their laughter growing louder by the minute. In the midst of the lively atmosphere at the North Bar, Susan and Rennie were enjoying drinks and cheering on the Chargers. Just a few weeks prior, she had filed for divorce against her husband, Eric Eubanks. Dodson was living with Susan and her 4 boys. They had taken some Valium and seemed to be having a good time. But as the night grew closer, something changed. Susan Eubanks and Dodson had a heated argument at the bar, which continued even after they arrived at the house near Cal State San Marcos. The two began fighting. Well, no big deal. Couples fight. Not Susan. She was not letting go of this fight that easily. During the argument, Dodson expressed his desire to leave her. However, this made Eubanks lose control of her emotions, and she resorted to violence. Susan began acting like the psychotic partner they warn you about. She slashed the tires of her boyfriend's car and turned on all of the headlights in an attempt to kill the battery. She started smashing his truck in her frustration and anger toward him wanting to leave. Susan locked all the doors, not letting him in the house so he could grab his stuff. Dodson, on the other hand, was adamant that he no longer wanted anything to do with her, and their journey had come to an end. He was a construction worker and was attempting to retrieve some clothes and tools from their residence. He ran to a nearby gas station and called the sheriff's department to request assistance. He asked for a deputy to stand by while he collected his belongings from the house, indicating that he feared Susan would harm him further. This infuriated her. She became jittery and started acting strange, much more than before. She lost control of herself as anger took over her body. As Dodson was making his way out, Erica arrived at the house. They left the house together, and as they drove, Dodson told Eric about Susan's behavior. Eric took him to the North Bar, perhaps to calm him down after the ordeal he had just experienced. With great concern weighing heavily upon his heart, the boyfriend told Eric that Susan had gone off the rails. She had spiraled into madness and spoke of unspeakable acts of violence against her innocent boys. They sat there for several hours, possibly talking about her erratic behavior. She's a little whacked, and I want you to know that she's talked about killing herself and the boys. That fateful evening, Mr. Eubanks received a chilling voicemail from his estranged wife. The message carried the haunting words, "Say goodbye," and left him feeling terrified and uncertain. The father, overcome with shock and worry, wasted no time in alerting the authorities, pleading with them to rush to the scene and ensure the safety of the precious children. But the nightmare was far from over. The sounds of sirens blared through the streets as police cars rushed to the house. Heart-wrenching emotions engulfed them as they made their way to the sound of weeping and wailing. A female voice called out for help. The police officials wasted no time and broke through the front door. But what they witnessed shattered their souls into a million pieces. It was a scene of unspeakable horror. Her 3 precious sons, Brandon Armstrong, Austin Eubanks, and Brigham Eubanks, lay lifeless on the ground, drenched in blood from fatal gunshot wounds to their heads. The tragedy had already struck, leaving behind irreparable devastation. And just when they thought the nightmare was over, the police uncovered the youngest one, Matthew Eubanks, barely clinging to life. They took him away to the hospital with the utmost urgency, but his fate had already been sealed. He passed away in the hospital. The police followed the sounds of crying and found Susan laying on the floor in a puddle of blood. Her shirt was drenched in blood as a gunshot wound became apparent on her body. Susan had shot herself in the stomach after shooting her 4 boys. An ambulance carried her away to the nearest hospital as well. As they combed through the house, their hearts sank even further when they found another child. But this time, it was not one of Susan's own. Susan had been babysitting her nephew. Thank goodness, her nephew was found unharmed and alive. In a fit of fury, Susan had taken her .38 caliber revolver and fired it at the heads of the boys, even reloading at one point. Brandon Armstrong, age 14, had been shot dead while he was watching television in the living room area. He was found with 2 bullet wounds to his head, lying face down with his unfinished cereal scattered around him. The next 2 boys were in their bedroom, playing a game of Nintendo while sitting on their bunk beds when their mother barged in and killed them on the spot. The news of such a heinous act spread like wildfire, and people were left wondering how something so horrific could happen to such young and innocent children. Susan Eubanks was born in the United States on June 26, 1964. Details about her life, family, and friends have not been disclosed to the general public. According to authorities, Eubanks had a blood alcohol concentration of 0.19%, which is well above the legal limit for intoxication. Additionally, she had consumed an amount of the tranquilizer Valium that exceeded her daily recommended dosage. This incident touched the entire nation and left the entire community in a state of shock. In the aftermath of the tragedy, there was an outpouring of support for the family and the community. Candlelight vigils were held in honor of the children's lives, and community members came together to provide emotional and financial support to those affected. Mental health resources were made available to those in need, and efforts were made to address the root causes of the tragedy, including poverty, lack of access to mental health services, and gun violence. The slaying of those 4 brothers were more than just a tragedy. They were a devastating blow to the entire community. The loss of 4 young lives, full of potential and promise, left a lasting scar on the hearts of those who knew them and even those who didn't. The mere thought of what those boys must have gone through in their final moments sends shivers down my spine. The pain and suffering they must have endured is unimaginable. And the fact that it happened in their own home, where they should have felt the safest, only adds to the horror of it all. The destruction of the house where the murders occurred only adds insult to injury. It's as if the city has wiped the slate clean, erasing any trace of the heinous act that occurred within its walls. How could a mother do this to innocent children? Even more so, her own. What made her act so violently, so mercilessly? According to divorce-related documents, Susan Eubanks recounted an incident in which she returned home after spending the night at a friend's, only to discover that her husband had torn apart her clothes and written the word divorce in nail polish on the bathroom mirror. "My husband called me a whore. He said that I should do everyone a favor and kill myself. He frequently talks of poisoning the food. I am afraid of him." Additional records indicate that Eric Eubanks is accused of using a shovel to smash the windshield of his wife's vehicle, and of getting intoxicated and choking her. Susan Eubanks brought her grievances to court officials, claiming that her husband was withholding significant funds to pay bills and hiding the telephone. Eubanks said her husband accused her of being unfaithful, threatened to harm her, and suggested that she take her own life. At the end of the homicides, Eric Eubanks was under a restraining order against his spouse of 9 years. Eric, a carpenter, who had been found guilty of domestic violence 4 months prior, was sentenced to attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. According to court documents, He declined to attend alcoholism counseling and denied having a drinking problem to counselors. Subsequently, an arrest warrant was issued when he refused to attend the meetings. Furthermore, he was arrested on suspicion of drunk driving. Some neighbors commented that there had been some ongoing problems, while others noted that the family kept to themselves and were not interested in socializing. When it comes to discussing the details of the slayings, Eric Eubanks, the father of 3 sons, has kept a low profile. In fact, he has never spoken publicly about the matter, and his absence from the courtroom during the reading of the verdict at the 1999 trial of his ex-wife, Susan Diane Eubanks, further reinforces his stance on staying out of the public eye in relation to the case. Despite the increased media attention surrounding the case, Eric Eubanks remains tight-lipped and has not made any significant comments or statements in the years that have followed. Even when contacted, he declined to be interviewed, indicating that he prefers to maintain distance from the matter. According to Melanie Cornwell, who kept in touch with Eric Eubanks for a few years before losing contact, she is not surprised about his behavior. Cornwell, who currently resides in Lubbock, Texas, mentioned that Eubanks does not like to talk about this situation as he is still in shock. The case that had been making headlines had sparked a lot of conversations around the town. People were discussing the possibility of child abuse being involved in the case. This wasn't surprising, given the severity of the crime. It was also revealed that this wasn't the first time the perpetrator, Susan, had displayed violent tendencies. This information came to light when some individuals who knew her shared their experiences after hearing about her violent behavior after a fight with her partner. As the investigation continued, some people close to Susan began to suggest that she had been planning this act of violence long before the day of the murders. They hinted that she had a vendetta and was seeking revenge. This raised the question, was this a spur-of-the-moment decision, or had she been carefully planning this for a long time? It's a chilling thought to consider the possibility that someone could be capable of such heinous acts and plan them out in advance. We will never know. What we do know is that she knew exactly what she was doing at the time of the killings, even though she refused to take responsibility for her actions. Susan had blamed her poor, violent decisions on a blackout while pleading her case in court. She claimed that after spending the entire day drinking with her boyfriend and using prescription drugs, she was badly affected. Along with that, she was dealing with the pain of her previous heartaches, her divorce, and all of her fights. All of this, coupled with her current fight with her lover, sent her into a weird state of mind where she became emotionless, almost robotic. Lawyers concluded that could not have been the case, since the gun she used had to be loaded repeatedly before being fired. Details from that day revealed that Susan loaded the murder weapon twice before she shot her children. She had to have realized what she had been doing by then. If she wanted to, she would have stopped right there. She just chose not to. After careful consideration, the court reached a unanimous decision to deny Susan Eubanks automatic appeal. Eubanks had raised several issues in her appeal, including concerns about the screening of potential jurors, an alleged violation of her privacy through an improper search of her San Marcos home, and the credibility of testimony from an expert witness for the prosecution. Despite the gravity of these concerns, the court deemed them insufficient to warrant a retrial or overturn of the original conviction. The trial of Susan Eubanks for the murder of her 4 sons captivated the nation and stirred deep emotions across the country. The tragic events leading up to the murder were nothing short of harrowing, and the subsequent trial revealed the complex and deeply troubling psychological landscape of a mother who had committed one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. During the trial, her defense team argued that she was suffering from depression and was under the influence of drugs and alcohol at the time of the killings. The defense presented the argument that Eubanks had suffered from a blackout or dissociative episode, which rendered her unable to control her actions. They cited her history of drinking and prescription drug use, along with past traumatic experiences and the domestic turmoil that surrounded her at the time of the murders, as contributing factors to her diminished state of mind. The prosecution, on the other hand, painted a picture of a vengeful mother who had killed her children as a means of punishing the fathers of her children for leaving her. They argued that Eubanks acted out of rage and a desire for revenge due to the abandonment of her former partners, the fathers of her children, and her boyfriend. Eubanks had a history of tumultuous relationships, and the prosecution believed that her anger toward the fathers led her to plan and execute the murders. She was fueled by her anger against the men that she perceived had betrayed her. Bonnie Howard, the deputy, said to reporters, "It was callous, it was cold. It was Susan Eubanks not being able to control the men anymore. So they had to suffer, even if it meant taking away the lives of 4 innocent children." Witnesses testified that Eubanks had a history of domestic violence and drug abuse. They also revealed that Eubanks had made threatening remarks toward her children and the fathers of her children in the past. The prosecution used these testimonies to support their argument that Eubanks had a premeditated plan to kill her children and make the fathers suffer. It was also observed during the trial that Eubanks had taken a different approach when it came to her own life, shooting herself in the stomach instead of the head, which would have been more consistent with the manner in which she had executed her children. Prosecuting attorneys believed that this was a calculated move by Eubanks, either to increase the likelihood of a reduced charge or to create an opportunity to falsely implicate someone else in the murders. Despite Eubanks not testifying, her attorney, William Raphael, argued to the jurors that Susan's mind was so impaired by drugs and alcohol that she lacked the conscious intent required for first-degree murder. Raphael aimed for a verdict of second-degree murder, which would preclude his client from the death penalty. Nonetheless, the jurors disagreed with Raphael's claims. After a brief 2-hour deliberation, the jury found Eubanks guilty on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. In August 1999, Susan Eubanks was charged with murder. 2 days later, they returned with a death sentence. The judge agreed with the jury's decision in October of the same year, and Eubanks was subsequently transferred to Central California Women's Facility, where she presently resides on death row. During her sentencing a month later, she expressed her love for her children, but also stated that she believed they would be better off dead. She claimed that she killed her sons in a final act of love, in what she described as an attempted murder-suicide. She said that there were a lot of factors that brought her to her decision. She mentioned that she grew up with alcoholic parents, which may have created an unstable home environment. Her depression further compounded her difficulties, and she felt that she did not receive the appropriate level of mental health support. She believed that killing them was the best thing she could do for them, given her perception of their bleak future. Despite her actions, she expressed a deep love for her children, which made her decision all the more difficult. The judge sentenced her to death, and she remains on death row at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was the case of Susan Eubanks, and why don't you go ahead and click on one of the 2 videos on your screen for another one of our videos.